So here's a question for you, because I'm suspecting you might have got this in America, but I don't know if there was any other country you would have got this. Have you ever been singled out for being Scottish? Because let's face it, they usually go for the Scottish part before they realise, oh, you're a tourist as well.
All the time. One of the ones that springs to my head is I was at a shooting range in Vegas. So it was like obviously like ex-military people that ran the place. And one of the guys is like, "Oh wow, you're Scottish?" It's like, yeah, yeah. He goes, "So what did you think of William Wallace? Because he's kind of like a terrorist, right?" I was like, "That is such a loaded question. I don't know what to do with that." How do you deal with that? People love Scottish people abroad. It's one of the things I'm most thankful for when I go places, that people like Scottish people.
Oh, yeah.
Typically, like New Zealand, very fond of us. You know, lots of other countries, especially when I went to France recently, and they're quite fond of you out there as well. I think being English is like so much worse. I'm pretty thankful, actually. I'm Scottish. What about yourself? How have you found it?
There have been a couple of instances, I have to say, where people have pointed to me and been like, oh, look, it's it's a Satu in the wild. I remember going back to America, there's been, surprisingly, it didn't happen as much. You know, there was one or two instances where people were like, oh my God, where do you come from? And it's like, oh, Scotland. And then that was kind of the end of the conversation. There was no follow-up, there was no verbal ping pong. I was like, come on, give me something. But it was just like oh, cool. The only thing I can think of in America was I got ambushed by a guy in a McDonald's of all places. And it wasn't so much for my accent, but it was more for my height. And he came over. Basically, long story short, he was trying to sell postcards or something. I don't know if this is like a common thing in America, because it seemed as if whenever you went on a train or public transport, there was always a guy with a speech prepared before they started coming round with a hat for donations. Any Americans, listen to this, please feel free to let me know if this is a common thing or not. But yeah, it was like, oh my God, you look like you play basketball. You're that tall and everything. And I'm like, okay.
Just for the reference here, for obviously the sake of this being an audio only thing, you are not that tall. I'm not saying you're not tall.
I'm tall, but I'm not NBA tall.
Yeah,
No.
no one in the NBA is looking at you and going, "This guy, this is the man we need."
For reference, I'm over 6 foot, but that's about it. Like, it's a comfortable height. Like, it's tall enough to get by in daily life. But the best one, I have to say, and the weirdest was, as I said, when I went to China, because the places my partner and I were going, we were going to places that weren't very, and I'm using this in the nicest way possible, weren't very tourist oriented. And by tourists, I don't mean tourists within China. I mean tourists as in outside of China. Like, if you're from outside China, you would go to places like Shanghai, Beijing, places like that. But the places like Hangzhou or, these other cities that we were going to, everybody kept looking at me. You know, when you get those old Wild West films where, the stranger from out of town comes in, everybody looks at you. That happened to me on a daily basis when we were on holiday there. The thing was, it wasn't out of nastiness or anything. I think some of the people genuinely had never seen someone like myself.
Never seen an NBA player in the flesh.
Yeah, an NBA red panda in the flesh. No, I don't think so. But one of the funniest things was, because my partner speaks Mandarin, she was translating a lot of things that people were saying about me. And it was quite funny. There were things like, I tried on a traditional hat in China. It's like, we get the bonnets for older people, like the flat caps for older people here. It was like their equivalent, and I've still got it. But I remember I put it on, and this woman who was selling it, she looked at me and she went, Piao Liang, which essentially translates to, oh, so handsome, so handsome. And I'm like, yeah.
Yes, I am.
But I know, proudest punch, but the funniest one was the amount of kids who, they were obviously kids, they've got no filter, and there was one kid who turned round to his dad and he went, Baba, Lao Wai, and said, Dad, a foreigner. And the dad was like, don't be rude. Then he turns to his mum and he goes, Mama, Lao Wai. I was like, oh my God. Yeah, I got the same thing when you were talking about the fairy pools. I got the same thing of, do you know those like cutouts you get where you put your head through and you get the photo? I got my photo with one of them, and these two Chinese teenagers came up and they were laughing because obviously they didn't know there was this, as you said, NBA player there. And then all of a sudden their phones raised and they started taking pictures, and I'm like, I'm on some like random Chinese person's WeChat or something. So that was an experience, I have to say. It wasn't like people were being aggressive about it, although just one last thing about that before we move on. I actually remember we went to the cinema and we went to see this film called Detective Chinatown 2, and basically they go to New York and they have to find the killer. And slight spoilers if you're never going to watch us, skip ahead a couple of seconds, but the killer turns out to be the only other Western character. And I'm sitting in the front of the audience as the only Westerner in the cinema, and I was like, come on, let's go.